Here's everything we learned from the first round of the 2025 MotoGP World Championship in Thailand. The 2025 MotoGP season has started with Marquez family domination, not just a double win from pole for Marc Val, but little brother Alex second in both races. But I think the thing that's going to stick in people's minds most if they watch the Grand Prix is how long Alex led for and the really weird circumstances in which he did. I imagine a lot of people guessed straight away that Marc was trying to help his tyre pressures, but it was a little bit more complicated than it seemed at first glance, wasn't it?
It was, but it was also a little bit easier than it seemed at first glance, I guess, because the fact he was able to do it and then get the result that he got does tell you a lot. But let's talk through the mechanics at first. So the expectation from basically everybody, including Alex Marquez, including Pecco Bagnaia, was that Marc was going to lead from meter one to checkered flag. And also that was Marc's strategy for the race, push for 2 laps, and then, you've gone away for a second and a half, then just basically manage from there, just ensure you do not crash and you have the pace reserve to win this. But tire pressure alarm. On his dash, he realizes that if he keeps going in clean air, because he tried to hammer the front brake to get the front tire pressure up into the range above the limit. He couldn't do it by himself. So he realizes at this point he's going to get a massive time penalty if it continues like that. Because let's remember, the MotoGP tire pressure rule is it's not one reading, it's a series of readings lap after lap, and you need to keep it above a certain minimum for a certain amount of laps, 60% of the race distance, which I believe here was 15 laps. So Marc's there, he's doing maths in his head. He's like, what does it need to be for how many laps for me to avoid a penalty that basically definitely is going to cost me the win? And the best solution he came up with, clearly, it was very obvious from moment one, because he starts looking over his shoulder, being like, well, when can I let him through to suck up some of the heat into the front tire to artificially raise the pressure? Well, I mean, that's exactly what he did. He let him through. He followed him with extreme ease for lap after lap. I think Alex said he realized very quickly that because of how close Marc is staying behind, he doesn't have an issue. He's just doing the tire pressure thing, and he has the pace in reserve to win this when he's going to win this. And it's exactly what happened. I think the race should be summarized for you by the final 3 laps. If you look at the final 3 laps of the top 3 compared to what the pace they were able to do, because they were all running, I think, reasonably close to what they could run to, because the podium fight between Pecco and Alex was still sort of going on, and Marc obviously needed to consolidate the win. There's no contest there.
No, once Marc's ahead, he absolutely streaks away with a almost slightly patronising ease. It was a fantastic strategy, a little bit contrived around the current tyre pressure situation MotoGP is in. A strategy also you can't really pull off unless your little brother is the person you're racing against. Well, I suppose you can, but it's easier when it's kind of in the family. But the striking thing when he did pull away was how easy it was, like you say, Val. And I think a lot of people looking at this performance all weekend, and of course it's the first time since 2014 Marc Marquez has won the season opener, and that was the most one-sided season in modern history once that got going. Is that the sort of thing we're in for again here? Is Marc Marquez about to completely dominate in the way a lot of people predicted as soon as he got hold of that Works Ducati?
It's not impossible. Because, you know what, this issue, this little hiccup in the race that had happened, it exposes one of the weaknesses, I guess, if you could call it that Marc and the Ducati factory crew that he doesn't yet totally know, new crew chief Marco Rigamonti, obviously they were the ones in charge of setting the starting tire pressure. They knew he'd be leading all race, and still they ended up in a range that in the end wasn't safe to avoid a penalty. The Ducati factory team is normally very, very, very good at this. You've seen plenty of Pecco Bagnaia races where there's no tire pressure concerns at all. However, the reason the tire pressure thing was an issue was because Marc was riding in a particular way. Well, that's how he explained it. He wasn't putting enough pressure on the front part of the bike. He was staying safe, and specifically because of that, he let the pressure be in a low window. He could modulate his riding at will, basically. He could do whatever. He dropped behind Alex, spent the entire race behind him, the entire MotoGP pack, crying out all weekend. You do not want to be sat behind somebody. You're getting heat blown into your face. Your front tire pressure is going through the roof, etc. Marc has sort of lab created that scenario for himself, then won the race with disgusting ease. That's got to be scary, right? He's good here, but who's this good? People do not win races when they have to artificially make them much harder for themselves. Marc's had to. He's still done it with ludicrous ease, and it never really seemed in doubt. So that's phenomenal.
Let's look at the counterpoint to that Marquez domination narrative, though. Pecco Bagnaia on the other side of Ducati garage. Quite a muted weekend for him. Here's Simon in the Buriram paddock tell us more about why it didn't go so well this time, but why we shouldn't judge him too harshly.
It would be really easy for former world champion Pecco Bagnaia to be leaving Buriram pretty dejected with his performances, with what had happened over the weekend, considering how conclusively basically Marc Marquez, his new teammate, beat him. But the reality is, I think, a bit different from that. There's a bit more to see from this weekend. There's a bit more to see from Bagnaia, because although obviously Marquez was essentially unbeatable all weekend, we kind of expected that before we came into this race. We knew that this is a circuit that Marquez has won at before. This is somewhere that he's performed really well at in the past, as are essentially the next two races in the calendar as well, as we go to Termas de Rio Hondo and onto the Circuit of the Americas, which is Marc Marquez country. And I think Bagnaia knows that too. So, he was happy today to take a solid podium as he did in the sprint. He would have been happier if he'd come home second ahead of Alex Marquez. And I think that was actually what he was maybe most upset about today, what he was most irritated about, that he was 4 further points behind Marquez than he'd maybe hoped to be. But, he's biding his time. We talked about this in the press conference afterwards, where he knows that he has to get through these races. He has to limit the damage to Marquez. He has to at least keep the gap as small as he can, or maybe take points off him here or there if he can, until we get back to the traditional European circuits. But even before that, Qatar is going to be somewhere that you expect Bagnaia to be strong. It's somewhere that Marquez is strong too, but it's somewhere that Bagnaia has been really, really fast in the past. Then we go to places like Mugello, like Assen, which is traditionally Bagnaia country. That's the circuits where he performs really well, and really where Marquez is probably the weakest in terms of this calendar. So although it looks on one hand like this was a less than ideal start to the season for the double world champion, I think that the reality is a little bit different, that there's a bit more promise to come. There's a bit more potential to be delivered from Bagnaia once we get to Europe. And I think it's while it looks like a pretty dominant weekend for Marc Marquez, it's far, far too early to say that this season is going to be some sort of a whitewash for him, and that his teammate isn't going to be able to deliver anything to challenge him.
Outside of the Marquez family domination, the star of the weekend for a lot of people was Ayagura, the Trackhouse Aprilia rookie. He's going to be the subject of our next video next week, so we'll go into more depth on him later. But Simon wants to talk about what his performance in particular means for Aprilia's season from here.
So it obviously hasn't been the start to 2025 that Aprilia had maybe anticipated coming into pre-season testing, mainly because of the succession of injuries that their number one rider, their reigning world champion Jorge Martinez, suffered, that meant he wasn't here this weekend for the opening round in Buriram. But I think it's fair to say that, all things considered, they've probably had a pretty good start nonetheless, because Marco Bezzecchi has been fast, he's been consistent, he's looked really good so far in the RSGP, probably better than anyone, including, to be honest, Marco himself expected him to be. So he leaves here pretty confident, pretty happy with what they've achieved. He's adapted well to the bike. He's setting fast lap times. He knows he still has some areas to work on, but it's fair to say that they've identified where those areas are. They know what they need to do going forward. He knows what he needs to work on as a rider, someone adapting to the Aprilia. And it's fair to say that we're going to go to Termas de Rio Hondo in 2 weeks' time, and that can be pretty quick there, because it's a track that he loves. It's a track that the bikes went well at in the past, and I think he's going to maybe not surprise us based on what we've already seen this weekend, but he's definitely going to continue with the good form that he showed at round one. Apart from him in particular, looking more generally at the RSGP, it's been a good weekend for the bike as well, because it looks like they fixed a lot of the issues that they've struggled with in the past. It looks like, the temperature issues in particular, where both the riders were getting cooked on the bike in the past, and where, as we've seen many times, when we get these really, really hot race days, things on the bike break. We had none of that today. Bezzecchi was actually quite complimentary about the bike, said it was a little bit cooler to ride than the Ducati had been in other super hot circumstances in the past, which has got to be a huge relief to their engineering team. And then apart from the factory box, looking a bit further back to or in this case forward, considering the results that they delivered to the satellite team Trackhouse. Ayagura, rookie sensation of the weekend. Obviously his results are perked up a little bit by the fact that we've done so many days of testing here beforehand, but he's still been remarkable. He's been the star of the show this weekend. The MVP, as Franco Morbidelli called him after spending the whole sprint race battling and eventually losing to him. And as well, on the other side of that garage, although maybe not quite as spectacular in terms of headline results, it's fair to say that Raul Fernandez has had a fairly decent weekend as well. He was strong at times. He wasn't as consistent as we would have hoped for, and he eventually ended up not finishing the main race as him, rather than the bike kind of overheated and was forced to pull out of it. But it's still been a really strong weekend for both sides of the Trackhouse garage, something that they can build on going forward, exactly like the factory side. You've got to get the feeling that he might not have been here, but Jorge Martinez probably sitting back at home in Andorra watching this weekend's events and thinking, yeah, that's good. That's maybe even better than I hoped it would be for whenever he does turn up fully fit, sooner hopefully rather than later.
Well, during testing, we thought for a while KTM might be the second fastest bike, even despite its problems it's been having. We also thought Yamaha looked like a potential Ducati rival on the basis of the first test. Not a great weekend for either of those two at the season opener, though.
Yeah, I think let's get Yamaha out of the way pretty quickly. I don't think they're in particularly much trouble. The track conditions don't suit him very much. The track layout doesn't suit him very much. Fabio Quartararo just had a weird test and a weird weekend of feeling. Jack Miller's looked pretty great on first contact with the bike. I mean, they didn't get good points out of the weekend, but I think they'll be okay. I think this is potentially kind of a nadir. Let's see, but potentially. KTM I'm worried about. Really didn't love what I saw this weekend from the bike and from the quartet of riders by and large. They just weren't very fast, and this is a track where you would expect the KTM to go quite well because of the track characteristics, because of the hard straight line braking. They were right in the mix in 23. They were right in the mix in 24, and they were not this season. Pedro Acosta crashed out of 9th in the main race, and yet he's pretty clearly the top performing KTM right now. So without him, they had nothing to fish for. Acosta says the bike was being basically under braking. The rear unloads too easy, and that's the issue they were having, which is kind of interesting given they have the bike with the rear box that may or may not contain a mass damper or whatever, and sort of that's supposed to help rebalance the bike. But so far, the first weekend of that hasn't been particularly successful. But he's also mentioned a tire deg issue. He was not like slow. I think the other guys were quite slow for much of the weekend, but it's just, if KTM doesn't get it done here, if that's the points haul it takes away from Buriram, I don't know. Look, either the bike's just a lot more of an all-rounder right now, or the season's going to be bad.